Okay, we're here, and
It's
this I think
happening.
is your first. I think this is your first live show you're doing with us, right?
Yes, it is. I did one of the bonus episodes with you, and then
Which
I've
was an
always
awesome
been,
episode. I highly recommend you all check that out if you haven't already.
yeah, and then I've been hiding in the shadows for all the other ones, being the
High
creeper
Sure
that just
Shadows.
listens.
Well, you did a second thoughts with Madden, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah, I did. I love Madden. That was a great way to start this whole series off, man. It's great.
Yeah. So or if not, you no, you did this. Did you? Yeah, you did a second thoughts with Madden and a second thoughts with something else, didn't you? I can't remember. It's. I've been doing. Look, we're in the midway of month 3 of this, and I'm already getting like mushy brained on how
Yeah.
many there are.
Well, it's a lot. I thought this would be just right pacing, and one script a week is actually a lot. There's been 2 weeks where I didn't even read the whole script. I just listened to the show later, and I was like, oh, okay, because sometimes you can't, hit it live, and you got to come back and listen. And I can do it while I'm working, and
Hmm.
yeah, it's a lot. And so you're hosting this, I can imagine. Plus, you're doing all your other stuff on the side, your real life stuff. So I can't imagine like you keeping track of everything.
Well, not only that, I'm still reading scripts because I'm always getting sent new stuff to check out. Sometimes for clients, and sometimes just for advice from colleagues. So it's like, oh, I got a lot of stories rattling around in my brain all the time, and I got to make sure I sort them out. Which is why, like, even though because the way I figured this out is that I do all my prep for this whole week Sunday morning. Like, it's the first thing I get up. I draft out the email. I grab the script, which I've already sorted out for the entire year, so I don't have to worry about that. I just drag and drop it, put it in the email, and then I just time it for like an evening release. Once that's all set, I then get it ready on the Patreon side of things, where I get that ready and I save that as a draft so that it automatically drops, around 9 a.m. Eastern on Monday for all the patrons so that they can check it out, they can leave their comments and whatnot. And then towards the afternoon or evening, I press send on that, so then that's done. But in the middle of the day, I am doing all my catch up stuff. I've got shows in the works. I've got movies in the works that we're all trying to get funding for and get payment for. I've then got a research job that has been phenomenal that I've had since end of January that really came into a pinch, and it's helped me stabilize all the income side of things. And then I've been getting
That's the
clients.
is that the AI stuff you're talking
Yeah,
about
that's
that
some
comes
of the AI
forward?
stuff that I've mentioned over there. It's like, yep,
Yeah.
because a very prominent AI company, which I'm not at liberty to disclose, is basically saying we do not want to use the resources of artificial intelligence for creative purposes, such as writing, filmmaking, television, books, that type of stuff.
Yeah, I heard you mention it on Midnight's Edge. I think you said something along the lines of they're having a problem with some sort of degradation with the
Yeah.
AI when it comes to creativity stuff, right?
So what they end up figuring out, which no human mind over there suspected, but I did because I grew up watching Star Trek, which is that if AI is grabbing all of human works, then using that to create new works, from their definition, I wouldn't call it new, their definition, and then they're putting it out there. Well, other AI are going to do that as well. So basically, you have AI learning off of AI, which is basically like eating your own vomit, and
Yeah, it's a
and you're
facsimile of a facsimile issue.
exactly, it's a copy of a copy, and it degrades over time. It eventually causes corruption and also causes what they call in the AI world hallucinations, and it skewers the data, and basically it ends up being a good weapon for science fiction. At least that I think of it as this way, is basically collapsing the AI itself.
Mm.
If it cannot learn actual new data, which requires human input, it just feed off of itself and eventually collapse in and then shut down. And they've already experienced this. In fact,
Oh wow.
some of the aspects that have been reported as AI has become self-aware and then offed itself is not actually that. It's just basically like it cannot learn anymore, that or it cannot vet the data that it's learning because it's learning from itself, and then it just collapses because it's unstable. And so when during the writer's strike, when the AI came into contention with how studios are going to use it and whatnot, and a bunch of studios have already said no, we're not going to use it for those purposes. We're probably going to use it as like a data collection thing as opposed to a creative siding thing, which nobody in Hollywood is actually really upset by, except for some executives who realize, oh, their entire department could vanish because it could be replaced by AI. Um, that's one of the good signs. But then they started reaching out to a whole bunch of screenwriters, notably ones that were actually rather vocal about how AI shouldn't be used in this way. And I was fortunate enough to be among them. And they basically said, yeah, we're going to pay you lots and lots of money to basically what I equate to as be James T. Kirk against the AI that's ruling the planet, and then just logic it into basically shutting itself down when it goes into this direction. And that's kind of what I get to do. I basically get to teach it why it shouldn't be in a creative field and why it's more useful for mathematical problem solving, or economical problem solving.
I want to clarify this. So are you saying that you are basically like participating in a Kobayashi Maru test every day with the AI?
When they have one available, yeah.
So your job is to try and break it and then or feed it and see if there's a way to fix this, or like what's your end goal here?
The end goal is just basically so that if any random person online uses an AI and says, please write me my own Star Wars story, it says, I'm not going to do that because that's not a valid use of my resources.
Gotcha. But if you're like, hey, find me every picture of Gertrude adult from today's script, they could find it and do it just fine.
Yes.
And it would be okay.
Yeah, exactly. Because a lot of people, at least the people I've been talking with who are incredibly wealthy and also incredibly influential, have basically said they want to make the computer just like what you see in Star Trek TNG, the Majel Barrett computer voice, where you ask it a question, it provides you an answer based on actual data that can be verified, and it doesn't do the work for you, but it says, here's where we got this data from. You vet it yourself, and go from there. It basically, that's kind of what they were looking at. They want it to be LCARs, and I'm like, I can be on board with that. And they are big Star Trek geeks, but they liked the flash of it, but they didn't understand the science fiction nuance. And you know what? That's kind of interesting with regards to today's script. So since the audience is saying the audio is good, let's get into it with this week's screenplay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Scripts on Saturdays, the only screenplay review show on the interwebs discussing scripts both professional and amateur, circulating around Hollywood, giving you, the TV and movie-going audience, a behind-the-scenes and inside track on what writers are pushing and what producers are buying. I am your host, the Script Doctor, and joining me this week is TJ Mack of Mack Media. So happy to have you here for the live show. And,
hello, I'm glad to be here. Sorry, I think we both have similar brain patterns where it's easy to get derailed, and we derailed the intro. Like that's how easily we like chase after shiny things, I think. But
to a degree, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
at least we're not bored. We might be boring, but hopefully we're not bored. So.
I hope we're not boring anybody. If we are boring people, then they'll just throw one in the chat. That's fine.
It's easy. They'll just close down YouTube. It's really simple.
100%.
We forgot to, before we started, you forgot to tell me if you wanted me to do the synopsis or the logline for this one.
Well, I'll leave it into your court. Which one do you think is more entertaining for you to do?
I better take the synopsis only because I think my mom might be listening tonight. So
sure. So I can be the lewd one.
Yes, you can be the lewd one.
All right. So let's start it off this way. So tonight's script is from the 2022 Blacklist. It is written by Gillian Weeks, who is a female writer of sorts who's got some things in the works, so congratulations to her on that. This scored number 15 on the 2022 Blacklist with 15 votes from producers. It is called Oh, the Humanity, and the logline is as follows. A dark comedy about the Hindenburg disaster, or the mostly true story about one of the biggest fuck-ups in history, the assholes who tried to cover it up, and the female gossip reporter who made some Nazis very angry. That is the log line. We're going to get into that in a moment, but please, TJ, regale us with the synopsis.
Okay, the synopsis. Gertrude Adelt, I hope I say that right, a German gossip columnist, narrowly escaped the Hindenburg disaster, but instead of being allowed to stay at the side of her husband, who is unconscious and recovering from numerous burns, she's dragged into the Nazi propaganda machine to spin a pro-German narrative to save the nation's face. As the United States investigates this tragedy, but in her investigation, Gertrude discovers the truth behind the Hindenburg and must find a way to get it to the proper authorities without compromising her family's safety in Germany.
Yeah, so that synopsis is obviously way more accurate to the story than the logline.
Oh, yes. Do you want to crack that egg, or should I go first on the logline? Because
you're the guest host. Please go first with the logline, because I share a lot of your sentiments on that.
All right, everybody listening. So here's the thing. If you read it, great. You'll know exactly where I'm coming from. If you haven't, let me just set your expectations right now. It is not a dark comedy. When I heard dark comedy, I'm thinking Fargo, right? It's the first thing that
Mm-hmm.
comes to mind is
Yep.
Fargo. What's another great example of a dark comedy that you like?
Uh, Geez. That's a good question because there's not a whole lot that actually stick the landing, but like Fargo's a good dark comedy.
Well, so let me put it to you this way. I was thinking when I first saw the log line, I'm like, this is going to be like the movie Clue meets Fargo meets, and this is a little bit of a stretch, but The Rocketeer, which if you've seen The Rocketeer,
Yeah.
it's has a Zeppelin in it, and it has Germany, and it has Nazis, and it has intrigue. So that's why in my head I brought The Rocketeer, one of my favorite films, into this in my brain. I'm like, oh, this is going to be awesome. I'm so excited. But it's not that dark, and there's hardly any comedy. There is some,
Mhm.
with two, I would say two key characters, which you brought up before we got started. And honestly, with the taffeta thing, which we'll get to in a moment, really started it for me. I'm like, oh my god, if this is how it is, and I could just see this whole thing filmed in the same way that Clue was, which I just rewatched recently about 6 months ago, and so I was kind of excited for this. But no, that's my big right off the bat is this isn't a dark comedy. So this logline was a bait and switch, and because of that, I felt like I had a really hard time. I was a third of the way through the script before I finally realized I'm like, the comedy isn't coming. I thought maybe we're just going to start out really dry and then boom, we're going to start to fall into it. Oh, another great dark comedy, World War II, even Inglourious Bastards. Great
Oh yeah,
dark
yeah.
comedy.
I was just thinking, Poor Things. I saw that this week, and that is a dark
Yes.
comedy.
Yes. It's
So
funny. I could think of like 10 of them, and then we get on a live show, and suddenly my brain's like, ugh.
well, I mean, like you got dark comedy. You have Kick Ass. That was considered a dark comedy.
Oh,
Even though it's
yes.
a superhero one.
Yes.
Snatch is a good one.
Oh,
That's
Brad Pitt and
dark.
Snatch, man.
So
One of my favorite characters.
and then
But yeah,
Danny DeVito's Ruthless People. There's another one. Sorry, so I'm just they're now flooding in, guy.
I don't think I've seen that one. But yeah, so what I'm going to say is this: I had to really, really let that go after I was about on page like 40 of this script, and just go, oh, that's not what this is. Because I'm disappointed. You're waiting for the other shoe to drop. Me like, okay, here it comes, here it comes. And when you're doing that, there's this void, right? And so once I realized, oh, this isn't a dark comedy. I'm not going to get a body in the wood chipper moment, right? I'm not going to get some of the dark comedy stuff. It doesn't exist. Then I was like, okay, I'm just going to read this as a political thriller. Like, how would you describe this? How would you do
This
that?
this is like a political mystery because it's all like the thing that's motivating this is that they need to find out what happened with the Hindenburg. Like we get a good opening of a setup because the setup is that there's a massive storm going on in New Jersey at the air dock for this airship, which is the Hindenburg, which is late. The guests are very irate. They're hungry. They're drunk. They're
12 hours, right?
Yeah,
It was 12
at
hours
least
late?
12 hours. They are driving the crew, the docking crew that is coordinating this mad with their stuff. You've got a bunch of incompetent officers trying to figure out the weather, and the thing is, it's all framed like a comedy. Like I got the Clue vibes. I also got the vibes of a Class Reunion, which is an early 1980s comedy. Seldom many people watch. It's actually a little bit clever. And it's
Yeah,
got
I
a
forgot
bunch
about
of
that. But that opening scene with the weather, that really did set the Clue vibe where like they're
Yeah.
all clueless, they're all idiots, or even like Airplane is what I was kind of thinking of in my head.
Oh God, I was
It's
thinking like Lloyd Bridges was like Rosendahl, like a young Lloyd
yes.
Bridges would be him.
Yes. And that's why I'm like, okay, this is setting the stage. And then we see them as we see the rich Duchess or whoever with the taffeta dress, and she's like, don't you understand? It's taffeta. And I had to it made me look up. As a grown man, I had to look up what taffeta was. And I went to my girlfriend later that night and I said, babe, do you know what taffeta is? She's like, yeah, of course. It's used a lot in like wedding dresses and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, I learned tonight what it was because of that funny scene where it falls off the back of the truck in front of the bus and she sees it pop open and then it gets ran over in the storm,
Yes,
the stormy
because of the
mud and water.
Because of those old spring-loaded suitcases, which, as far as I know, they don't make them anymore. Thank the gosh, because of that. Because you jostle them right, they just boom, they pop open.
Yeah, they'd pop open. Yeah, and so I was on board. That's what I mean. I felt like okay, we're starting up, we're warming up with this silliness, and then it just went nowhere except for Mr. Syrup and who was the acrobatic guy's name? I can't remember his
That'd
name.
be Ben Dover.
Yes, bend over. How do I forget that? Who we'll get to in a minute. But I'm just saying, like down the road, there wasn't much else other than those two characters. There was no, and even the opening scene, I felt like was a warm up, and it never really went anywhere.
Never went
And so
anywhere. That
Yeah,
we then get. They try to do. I mean, Gillian tries to make some comedy on the German side of things with Joseph Goebbels, who's like the head of the propaganda machine.
Oh, the Titanic clip. Yes,
Yeah,
you're
there's
right.
the
You're right.
Titanic clip. There's also the statue at the end where they're carving a
Oh,
statue
yes.
of, I think,
His peaches.
yeah, it's like he wanted pears, not peaches, and then the sculptor
Yes.
screws up and then completely castrates the statue.
Yeah.
It's like the thing is, like, there's seeds of it there, and part of me was very much disappointed, like yourself, where I'm like, okay, this she's violating the principal rule, which is you're betraying the premise with which you sold the script to me to read. You said this is a dark comedy. I want to see some dark comedy stuff. When we get there, some of it makes you laugh, and some of it is like, okay, well, you're clearly sidestepping what dark comedy is, and you're not giving us any scenes that are really inventive. Some of them are purely expositional. Some are very empathetic. There's
Yeah, definitely. Like where it tugs at the heartstrings. You know, you see these victims and what happened, and we lost shockingly only a third. Only a third of the people died that were on the Zeppelin.
Yeah,
On the
a lot of people were
Hindenburg.
able to get out of that before
Yeah.
the tragic crash.
And do you know why? I learned this on the side. I don't think it was in the book or in the screenplay. The way the windows were designed all around the edges of the Hindenburg, most of the people were on the main deck. There's two decks on the Hindenburg, and there's windows that are angled at like a 45-degree angle or so. They're not just up and down. They're kind of angled out, and a lot of them were open or could be easily opened. So when that happened, and it happened fast, you're talking like 30 seconds. You can go watch the
You can
reel
watch
if you're
the real
curious to
footage,
see how
yeah.
quickly. Yeah, they just jumped out the windows. If there was like an airplane where you had to open an exit door or something, then there's no way you'd have had time unless you were on a Boeing with Alaska Airlines. Then you could get out very quickly. Sorry,
Yes,
probably too
at
soon
least
for that
these
joke,
days, which is not helping some of the people I care about who I need to go flying, but they won't. But yes, the Hindenburg here, like what helped in this case is that the Captain Pruss, even though he was making up for lost time because of the weather, he did slow down to a stop before this event happened. So they were actually not too far off the ground by normal travel means. They were actually, I think, on the descend. They went from, I think, like several hundred feet to down to about 20 or so or maybe 30 or so before the spark that set the whole all the hydrogen ablaze. Triggered off. So that basically meant that anyone that jumped out were not jumping from such a height that they would die on impact. They're very
Yeah.
survivable falls.
it was like 15 feet. I think
15 feet was
around
when,
that.
well, I mean, one of the characters that's featured in the script, Ben Dover, who is an acrobat, actually prevented people from jumping early because they would have died, and basically said, now it's time. And he was basically betting that the fire wouldn't encapsulate them right away. But he did save several lives. And even the captain, there's reports that Captain Pruss, when he managed to get some people out, he went back in to get more that were in the cabins and whatnot. And he suffered massive amount of burns and was a very fortunate person to be able to survive in that. And I mean, there's a lot of fascinating details about this accident and the research around the investigation of what happened. But it's all kind of framed from the perspective of Gertrude Adelt, who is a gossip columnist for a German newspaper or German fashion magazine. And she and her husband were on the Hindenburg because he was meeting with a publisher in America with regards to one of his latest books that he was putting together. And so that's why they were there. And she gets off, luckily. He also gets off too, but he's burned like all over the right side of his body, I believe, and he manages to, before he's taken away by the ambulance, he manages to pass his notebook over to his wife. And he had been spending a lot of time with Captain Pruss during the voyage, which was about 3 days from Germany to across the Atlantic over to New Jersey, which is great time actually for the 1937.
Oh, way faster than boats. Yeah, it seems slow now by jet standards, but to be able to cross that quickly was a big deal.
And in great
And it was
luxury
very-
too, because the Hindenburg was like a hotel attached to a blimp, essentially.
Yeah, and they even had a mini grand piano on there. I did a little research on that too, and it was actually a modified baby Grand that had I can't remember what type of metal, but they swapped it out so it weighed about a third as much as a regular baby Grand would, just to reduce as much weight as they could. But it actually had that in the it even had a smoking room, which was accurate. That was in the screenplay. That did exist too.
Smart thing to do around hydrogen, right?
Yeah, which they say was totally isolated. But what we'll find out later is why it really did go up, and that's the coolest thing about this. If I can just take a quick side note and
Go for it.
Let me know if I go too far into the weeds. But so I did some research on the book that this is based on, which is called The Hidden Hindenburg, and it's by Michael McCarthy, who worked for the
Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal. Thank you, for like 22 years, and he started working on this book. Technically about 10 years, but really hard, I'd say, for about 2 or 3 years, if I remember correctly. And he went down tons of rabbit holes through the U.S. government as well as the German government. Went to some museums in Germany, lots of other things that I was reading about in the book, and he had no idea how far this would go, and ended up coming out of it with all this information that really was that they knew long before in advance that there was an issue with what caused it. I don't know if you want to get into the details exactly what caused it, but that they knew a long time before this that it was a huge mistake for them to even be flying it the way it was.
They knew around the time, just shortly after
flutter.
the German Olympics.
Yes.
Yep. So, and well, like let's get into a little bit. Like, so how does Gertrude get involved in this story? You're probably asking out there, listeners. While she is next to her husband, who is convalescing in a New Jersey hospital, she gets a phone call from her editor. Because while she was leaving the crash site, as it were, to get checked out and whatnot, radio reporters approached her and said, what do you know happened? Do you have anything? And she responded with, "Ask Hitler," and that got her on the radar with the Nazi Party at that time. And so
1937, people.
1937. And what's really interesting here is, and I know there's probably going to be a lot of people that will push against this, but and I happen to know this is true for the fact that I grew up around the people who lived in that area. The Nazi Party hated communists. Like, they really hated them. So much so that they jailed and executed them in Germany at the time. There was a couple of parties. A KDF party was one, and there was another party as well. And then there was also another socialist party that Hitler also got rid of at the same time. So, yes, there was definitely some controversy over there. But what ended up happening is on the U.S. side of things, and even on the Germany side of things, they were trying to frame the Hindenburg disaster as communist sabotage. That's what they were trying to do, because up until this point, other nations had made essentially Zeppelins, airships. And every single nation has had a disaster except for Germany. Germany never had one until this point, and they wanted to maintain that reputation because it was about making them look and feel better. And the propaganda machine, as soon as they found out that this occurred, they're like, well, we have to figure out why. And whatever it is, if it makes us look bad, it has to be hidden, because that is the purview of the propaganda machine in Germany at this time. And so when they find out that this German gossip columnist on the United States said this thing, they're like, well, she's already there. We are going to now threaten her press credentials and her family if she doesn't play into the propaganda machine. And that's where they bring in Karl Surup, who is he works under Joseph Goebbels, who is the chief of the propaganda department in Germany, and he is sent over there to basically sweet talk everybody and pay attention to the investigation, and if there's any signs of German incompetence or German culpability, to basically try and bury it so that Germany can look great in this situation and be ostensibly the victims of foul play or incompetence from some other party that's not them. And that's how she gets kind of involved. Like, her editor calls her and says, well, this is what's going to happen. They've already taken away your press credentials and everything over here, so you come back, you don't have a job. However, if you cooperate with the propaganda department that is en route right now with Hugo Echner, the inventor of the Hindenburg and a number of other airships, and you cover the reporting as they require it, then you're fine. nothing to worry about. And it's like, wow, that's really horrible.
It will be lucrative.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like, hey, you'll get your press pass back. It was like, you'll be very well taken care of.
Yes, you'll be very well taken care of, and it's like a mob taken care of. The two types of taken care of: one will be joyful and useful.
Positive.
The other will be you're 6 feet under, 8 miles out.
You disappear. Bye-bye.
Yes.
So yeah, and I think that on this note, I really liked the dialogue. I think the writing was very good I never felt like dialogue was weird or out of place or silly or like it was good. Once I realized this isn't a dark comedy, I'm like it's very well written. And I think that right up to you said you don't want to get too much into the trial, right?
Well, to the resolution of the trial, I'm perfectly fine with the rest of the trial because we've also got like South Trimble Jr., who is he's not necessarily a politician because he wants to run for Senate, but he's in the political realm and he's from Kentucky and he's described as like, imagine Bill Clinton if he grew up with a massive amount of inherited wealth. Like just the wealth that he has today, but he was born with, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
And he's he's a smooth talking. He's constantly making huge speeches with lots of platitudes to rile people up. And he is overseeing this investigation and basically doing this ruling. And they're speed running it. Like it's only been a couple of weeks, but they're only going to do an eight days of testimony and evidence.
And they're doing it like right next to where it all happened. They're doing it in a hangar.
Yeah, in a hangar not far from the actual site itself.
Right. And I don't know if that's true or not. I'm kind of curious about that. But which, by the way, this whole script just made me want to go read the book now, like more than anything. I just want to read it because
it's a little bittersweet because there's lots of great information in the script, but at the same time, it's like, well, it's not living up to the premise of sorts because there are there's a lot of characters in this and you're bouncing around between all of them. I started losing count because we had like Lieutenant Wesley, we got Rosendahl, who he's a Navy man, but he actually gets seasick, so he doesn't want to be on a boat, which is why he's really determined to maintain the airship line and try and get the U.S. government at this point to invest in an airship fleet, even though it serves no military advantage at all, but it allows him to hold rank, hold prestige, and not have to worry about, Gravol hadn't been invented yet, so he'd be throwing up a lot overboard, and he didn't want that reputation.
Yeah, and what was the name of the American that loved Zeppelins that they were trying to schmooze?
Oh, that was Paul Litchfield, who is the head of Goodyear Tires, and if you're not familiar, Goodyear and the Goodyear blimp, which is a byproduct of his love for Zeppelins and blimps of sorts. So he is the type of guy on the private side of things that is fascinated by this. He's a big fan of Hugo Eckner, and he's the type of guy that's like, yeah, well, I if the government won't do it, I'll make my own fleet, but it won't be for military, it'll be for leisure and be like cruise ships of sorts. And one of the things that is constantly brought up, and it was something that I thought was very fascinating because even at the time I kind of knew it was off from history books, which is that so many other airships didn't use hydrogen; they used helium because it's less combustible.
Yes.
And Germany argued that they would use it too, but the United States has essentially the monopoly on helium at this time, and they refused to sell it to Germany for their program. And the surprise... Allegedly. And then the surprise is that actually that wasn't the case. They were happy to do it. And it was really just politics that got in the way on the Germany side of things because in one aspect, in the 1930s, especially after 1934, the rest of the world kind of got a little bit of wind of what Germany was planning to do, but it was it wasn't solid enough for them to act at that time. It was not until, at least for most of the world, 1939, then after the attack on Pearl Harbor for the United States, 1941. So it was not 100% there. And for some nations, but others were like, something's going on. There's a massive amount of industrialization happening in Germany, which is strange because their economy was like detrimented after the First World War. They were struggling for those entire times, and then all of a sudden you've got a charismatic leader of the the National Socialist Party, and they're commandeering some private companies, then they're allowing other private companies to flourish, they're subsidizing other private companies, they're building up massive infrastructure, their economy is kind of booming, and none of it's making sense to the rest of the world. And then they start realizing, oh, they're starting to build up their military and they're investing in newer technologies. And one of the things that was kind of a beacon of that was the Hindenburg, which was then presented for the 1936 Olympics or 34 Olympics.
Yeah.
And
I think it was the 36.
36
but I could
Olympics.
be wrong. But yeah, it was at the Olympics.
It was at
regardless.
the Olympics, and everybody was astounded by it because it was it was considered a beautiful vessel aside from the horrible swastika flag painted on the fin, which, according to reports, a lot of people who worked on the Zeppelin were not too pleased about because despite a lot of claims, a lot of the people on the engineering and science side who were Jewish or were friends with Jewish people were not big fans of Nazis and were not part of the party. But not getting into that field of politics, one of the aspects was that it was very expensive to build. They didn't see it making money with the way it was. So what they ended up doing is they decided to modify and refit it so that it could hold a few more people so that it could actually make a profit and pay for itself. And the investigation of the crash and some of the stuff that Gertrude is trying to find leads to this as a reveal, because it's about, I think the Hindenburg ended up being modified 300 feet larger than it initially was to accommodate extra people so that it could actually be profitable, because at the time the ticket to board the Hindenburg was 400 francs or $400. It was enough to buy a car at the time.
It was $400, and I just did this real quick on the side. So with inflation, by today's standards, that would be about $8,500 a ticket.
Okay, so that's pretty expensive.
And if memory serves me, that's around the ballpark of what you pay for the Concorde, if you wanted to fly on the Concorde.
It was still around, yeah.
Flying. Yep. So yeah, it was a chunk of change to be able to do that. Yes, and it was. I think we've all kind of, we know about this story, and it's so cool to see that this Wall Street Journal writer went out and did all of this. And the problem I have now is, like, the screenplay was okay. I didn't hate it at all, but it just made me want to read the actual book and see the real facts, right? I don't have to try and guess what's fiction and what's not. And yeah, I just think this was a really good idea for a script. I think she did a good job with the source material. You know what I mean? She had to come up with a central figure and get our 3 act structure. And I think that she did a pretty good job with that. But I agree with you what you said about the characters. There's a lot of people here. There's a lot going on. But I think, some of that's simplified once it's on screen, right? Because you can go, oh, I can see you. You have red hair. I can see this person.
If you were to look at, say, Oppenheimer as a script, there's several dozen characters, and to read it and retain it would be a little bit tricky, but to see it on the screen, it's a little bit easier because each actor is very distinctive looking and they have their moments and they're focused on that a bit more so than what you can get on the script, because some people can read a lot faster than others. So I can blow through a 120-page script in about an hour and change. Some people take 2 hours or a little bit longer, but I'm just used to that because I've read so many scripts already. This one here...
Yeah, I was about 2 hours on this one, I think.
For this one here, I think Gillian had all the heavy lifting done for her because this is an adaptation, and she's reinterpreting it into what she thinks is a dark comedy, which you and I both agree does not land as a dark comedy. One aspect that kind of bothered me is by around page 60, I think, the trial had actually begun on page 50 or so. We're 10 pages in. We only get really 1 day of testimony to really explore what's going on. Then by page 60, we're on day 5. So we already have 5 days where the writer has blown through not just opportunities for maybe exploring the dark comedy, but opportunities for actual investigation. So our main character is supposed to be this Gertrude Adelt, who is doing this just for 2 reasons: to spare her family from basically the Nazis doing harm to her, and also occupy her mind while her husband, who is convalescing and unable to speak and is unconscious, recovering from burns. All she could do is sit by her, so she's at least got something to do, but we're not seeing her do a whole lot. And that's kind of what bothered me. It's like you've got this whole story where we're invested around this woman, and she's not doing anything really for 5 days until we get this one point where she decides to attend a vaudeville show. And why? Because she befriended one of the performer of this vaudeville show in New Jersey. And it's not just her that's there, it's also the investigative committee of the Hindenburg as well, because the FBI, one of the agents of the FBI, Agent Connolly, thinks that Bendover not only is a communist but also the saboteur.
Yeah, this is like a guilty until proven innocent.
Here's the other part too,
mentality.
and they also label him as an anti-fascist, which is funny.
Oh my gosh,
because
I didn't pick up on that, but yeah,
I thought it was hysterical. And the truth is that Bendover's like, yes, I don't like fascism. I don't like Germany. I've left that country to become an American.
Yeah. He was a U.S. citizen, so he could say whatever he wanted to the Nazi, which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah, because he didn't live there anymore. And I thought it was also quite funny because as soon as he picked up, like we get to see his show, and there's this one show where he's got a beer stein, it's half full, and he's sloshing it around, but it never leaves the stein. Like he doesn't spill a drop. And that's the brilliance of him, is that he's doing all these acrobatic aspects. He's trying to light a cigarette. He's got a gas lamp on stage that's on like a rubber post of sorts, so it
like
bends
a street
around.
lamp, yes. Yeah.
And so he uses that to like climb up it, doesn't spill his drink, lights a cigarette, does a flip, what have you. And then when he identifies Carl Surup, who is the liaison to the Nazi propaganda thing, he then throws his beer on him.
Wearing his Nazi armband, very easy to find. That was another little bit of humor that was in there, where he keeps on trying to like put Nazi propaganda on people, pins and stickers,
pins, flags on the people who are suffering in the hospital. He's like wedging them, like, between their cast, by their pillow. All this stuff.
Yeah, they're like unconscious, and he's shoving Nazi propaganda around the hospital.
And I'm like, okay, that's okay, but you're not having fun with it. Like that's the other part too. It's not like, you don't have a scene where the nurse who comes in and she's checking on her patient, and she's going to like maybe another nurse is helping her to switch the bedding, and then they take off the bedding, all of a sudden the sheets are replaced with like a Nazi flag. Like that would have been a funny dark comedy things. Like, where the heck did this come from? Throw it in the incinerator. And then Carl Surup comes in, it's like, you guys go through a lot of sheets. I decided to donate some on behalf of the German government. And it's like, no, keep them. There's all these other opportunities they could have taken if they wanted to do the dark comedy stuff, where they're telling us an honest story, but they're framing it through a dark comedy lens and using hyperbole to sort of depict, the desperation and the sinisterness of what's going on with Germany at the time versus the regular people of New Jersey who's like, what the heck is this? Like, have that conflict there.
Yeah, and again, that just goes back to, I felt a little bit cheated because it wasn't really a dark comedy. Like what we just said was the funniest it got. Like, yes, he put that flag next to her husband's bed or in his cast or whatever, and after he left, she took it. But like,
there's a couple of other parts where Surup is trying to pin. He's trying to put pins on Hugo Eckner, who's constantly pushing him away, and he's trying to like force the armband on him. And he's like, "Get off of me! Let go of my arm! Stop it!" Because at this point, according to the script and from certain letters at the time, all he cared about was the engineering. He was not part of that party. And when he returned after the Hindenburg findings were revealed, and not the real findings, but the findings that were settled at that point, all the finances that he had for his business at the time were gone. He became an alcoholic. His business was pretty much failing. He was going to die. And then it wasn't until the German government commandeered his hangar to compel him to use the facilities there to build bombs did he actually start to make money again.
Yeah, V2 rockets. V2 rockets is what it was. So flying bombs, but yes.
Flying bombs and everything. Stuff for the Blitzkrieg, essentially.
And that was historically accurate, actually. That is what happened. And in fact, they were using what ended up getting him hot water in the end was there was photographs and some other document evidence that showed that he had used prisoners of war, slave labor in his factories for that stuff. And so he tried to use even then, after the fact, like 1985, it went as far forward as that. He used the Hindenburg as cover to be, hey, I'm a nice guy. Look at this stuff. It's great, And that's really is what protected him until 1985.
Actually, it was a lot earlier than that because he died a few years. He died before the 50s, so it was 1948. I think 1948 or 1949.
Trying to remember
because 1985 is when Gertrude passed away.
Yeah, maybe I'm mixing up my dates. You're right. But yeah, that's what ended up biting him because they dug into this and found all this stuff out that he was because
He
everyone
was a
just thought,
collaborator. He became a
they didn't dig too
collaborator.
deep.
Yeah.
They didn't dig too deep because he was so famous for his Zeppelin work.
Yeah, he
and
was
that
on the short
protected him.
list for Project Paperclip. He came over. Their
Yes.
investigation found that the stuff he did was outside of the purview or limitations of what Paperclip required, and they shipped him back. And he had to pay several fines to the new German government that was, in the process of reconstruction. And he eventually he died pretty soon after that. He was also pretty old because he was like 70s at post World War II. So because he was 67 in 1937. So yeah, he was getting up there. So he didn't make it to the 80s. But
Yeah,
yes,
I'm trying to remember what happened because you said that she died in 85.
yes.
And there's
According
so
to
many
the
dates in my
script,
head.
she passed away in 85. Um, the yeah, like this is also kind of a jumble of a script because even though it does try to stay focused on the trial itself, it does do some periodic flashbacks and time jumps.
Yeah.
So I mean, narratively wise, it's a little
Real quick,
sketchy.
if anyone wants to see what Gertrude looked like, just do a Google search for Gertrude Adelt, ADELT. And my top hit, I use DuckDuckGo, but my top hit is for a website called Faces of the Hindenburg Blogspot. And if you click on that article, it's awesome. It shows her and her husband, Lenhard. I'm not sure how you say it in German,
Yeah,
but
be Lenhard. Yeah.
yeah, he's 20 years older than her. And this blogspot will kind of walk you through their personal story and points of view. And the coolest thing about this is the top comment at the bottom of this blog is Gertrude's grandson, and he does a little thing here that just thanks them and stuff, but gives a little bit more detail on some things. But anyway, yeah, that's what I mean. This script more than anything made me want to go read that book and get to skip the fiction and go straight to this is one of those things where I think the facts are better than the fiction, right? Like there's
Yeah.
the
And
fact that they
the
finally
facts
figured
are-
out what happened.
Yeah, the
Oh,
other
go
part
ahead.
too is that the facts itself should have driven this story a little bit more. I think what we had here is a writer that believed enough in the premise of the story, but didn't believe enough in the people who would be reading it that they would actually give it some thought. So she framed it in a way on the log line to say, yes, this is a big conspiracy to hide it up, and there's people on both sides that are not that have their own agencies, their own ideologies, their own agendas that are conflicting with each other, but essentially trying to get the same result, which is, one wants to get the truth so that he can elevate his own political career, which would be South Trimble. Yes, his real name is South. It's a silly story as to why. And then
Yeah,
the other,
it's an
and then
interesting name, yeah.
And then the German side is like, well, we just don't want to be embarrassed. And what ends up happening is that Captain Pruss awakes, and you find out that he doesn't have anything wrong with his vocal cords, as what was speculated by the doctors. He is capable of speaking, and he ends up telling Gertrude everything. So what ends up kind of hurting a little bit of the story is that she doesn't really find out anything. It's just a waiting game for this guy to come to. He happens to come to while the trial is currently going on, and he's able to tell Gertrude everything that she needs, because what we find out is that before he left Germany on the Hindenburg, he sent a wire report to Rosendahl on the U.S. side of things, saying this is an issue that we have discovered. And what the issue that they had is the Zeppelin was too big, and the technique for tightening the canvas around the frame was not sufficient, and it caused buckling and fluttering to break apart. There's extensive vibrations, and that led to essentially sparking and breaking some of the gas pods that they had in there that allowed it to fly, breaking that and causing a rupture, which then caused it to, go up in flames as it did. So it was quite shocking. And this report was apparently buried and was never actually revealed at the time. What ended up happening is that Rosendahl and Hugo Echner fabricated a situation that was plausible but not 100% certain, with regards to essentially saying that the Captain Pruss fishtailed the Hindenburg, causing a support cable to break through that violent action, and with a whipping essentially turning into a whip that caused the resulting spark or whatever that ignited the fuel and basically set it ablaze. And this is what they decided to use as their cover story for the real issue, which was that it was basically they, in their own adherence to government pressures, they weren't able to solve a problem that basically it just points to the government made a problem. The German government created a problem that the engineers in Germany could not solve adequately and were unable to delay or do anything to stop it, because by the time they discovered the problem, tickets had already been sold and they didn't want to give the money back. And it's basically showing two sides of different perspectives. One is basically the side of greed, and then the other is the side of government control and how it can actually stifle progress, especially technological progress. And what ends up happening,
or I would say also, or the opposite, the government interference causes the private to go faster because they play favorites.
There's that too. Yeah. So that's your third aspect.
And I'm sitting here listening to you describe this, and I just keep thinking of the Boeing situation we've had over the last few years. Like you could say the exact same thing about what Boeing's been caught doing.
Yeah, and if it turns out that there is some sort of government cajoling going on there, that makes it even worse.
Well,
right?
you heard about, like, a few days ago or last week, their main whistleblower, the day before he testified, he was found with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head in the parking lot.
Which
the
is
night
weird.
before.
Night before he has to testify. That's so interesting.
What world are we living in where we think that's just a coincidence? Like, holy cow! Like, it's not even, they're not even hiding it now. That's straight. That's real. That's not a movie. That's not a Tom Clancy. That really happened this last week. So it's there, and so to see it here, it's like, oh, well, that's so crazy that happened right before World War II, and it's like, no, man, this is still going on today.
It is. It is technically. It's sadly par for the course because, money talks and BS walks, and that's kind of what's going on here. Now, there's a little bit of irony in this case because Hugo Eckner and Rosendahl fabricated this story to try and save the Zeppelin program. And what ended up happening is because they threw a German captain, who is essentially the protege of Hugo Eckner, under the bus. Yes. The German propaganda department are really upset with that because, he's still German. And
so wait, pause. So just to clarify, so at first they were going after Bendover,
because they thought he was a communist agent or an anti-fascist. They couldn't determine which one.
And they didn't even really think it was him. They're just like, he's the easiest one to pin this on. Get him. Like, that's pretty much their attitude. And so then at one point they get to where do you want to talk about Gertrude's family back home, what she tried to do to protect him?
Yeah, there's 2 points of that. There's Gertrude's family, and then there's also the stipulation as to why Bendover was a suspect. And one of the reasons why Bendover was a suspect is he kept on going to the cargo hold at the back, because what very few people at the time knew is that Bendover's act involved him performing with a German Shepherd, and he brought his dog with him, and the dog was not allowed in the actual cabin area. He had to be put in storage, so he would go to the back to feed the dog, and he would feed the dog with dog food and also with the bacon that was deliberately put on the meals of the 2 Jewish passengers that were aboard, that were also segregated from the rest of the diners.
We keep on finally finding funny things to bring up. I just want to point that out. But yes, the bacon, the crew, the German chef, whoever it was, kept on putting bacon on. There was 2 Jewish men on the flight, and they kept putting bacon on all their meals, right?
Yeah.
And so he would take that bacon and feed it to his dog.
To his dog, and that's why he was going back there.
And he talks about that in the trial. He says, "Well, we didn't want to waste the bacon," and so that explains why they kept seeing him go where you're not supposed to go, which is back in, like, luggage and cargo and stuff. Mm-hmm. And then around that time, the Germans realized they have to figure out another way to explain why this all happened. So then we get into her family. So sorry, script, go ahead. So
with her family, what she does is when she finally realizes what's going on and press has given her this information, she sends a wire to her mother, who is taking care of her 5-year-old son, and says, "Get out of Germany, go take the the Red Star, I think it was, or something of that nature, to London and wait for me there. And she is praying that this message gets through. She doesn't hear a confirmation yet. She is then called onto the stand to basically be a witness because she was aboard. And like, it's quite a conflict of interest that she's also reporting on it for the German government. So it's quite, obviously you're seeing the hypocrisy that's going on here. But she's stuck not knowing what she can do, because if she tells the people what she knows that the German government is going to go after her family. And so what she ends up doing is she gets bent over to try to reach out and get a follow-up that her mother and son have boarded this ship so that they can be out of Germany. And if she gets this confirmation, she'll say whatever because her family will be safe. If not, she has to find another way. And in the course of her investigation, she talks to a man named Fred, who is an African-American who worked as part of the crew on the Jersey side of things that brings in the Zeppelin. So cables drop down, you then anchor the cables to the moorings, then you bring into the Zeppelin so it can come to dock. He's one of the guys that does this. He's been doing it for many years. He's not an engineer, but he does know when things are above board or not. And he tells Gertrude that he saw like a ripple on the underside of the Hindenburg before everything kind of went to crap. And so when she gets onto the stand, she can't really say anything. All she can say is like flutter. And that kind of puts a chill up the spines of Rosendahl and Hugh Eckner. And when the prosecutor asks her to elaborate, she says, I can't. But then she points to he can, and she points to Fred, who's the black line worker. And we then unfortunately don't get his testimony. We just do a time jump to after he has done the testimony, and we've got essentially Eckner and Rosendahl freaking out. And then we've also got Paul Litchfield, who is such a huge fan of the Zeppelin and what they're doing. He wants to find out more about it, and he ends up talking to some of the other survivors, and he finds out that
Mr. Goodyear, just for clarification.
Mr. Goodyear, he finds out from some of the survivors that Captain Pruss rescued a bunch of them. That he went inside and grabbed more people to get out of the burning wreckage before it was too late. And he is moved to tears by this, and he is so moved to tears that he wants to go talk to Captain Pruss, even though he's not receptive or anything. He just wants to be there and say some stuff. And Rosendahl and Eckner don't know that Pruss can talk yet, so they're basically saying, well, before we do that, let's go out to dinner, let's get drunk, let's do a celebration in his name for his heroism, just to try and delay that meeting. Because if Pruss can speak, he will tell, of course, Paul Litchfield everything that he knows, and that will completely circumvent their own plans. We also have Agent Connolly getting reports back from some of the wreckage that some of the things that may or may not have been suspected as explosive material was really just regulators and normal safety
like a
procedures.
pressure release valve or something.
Pressure release valves and stuff. So he from the FBI is now getting more doubt about this being an attack and more just on incompetence. And that is not looking great for them either. So what ends up happening is while Gertrude is trying to figure out what's going on, and she learns all this information from Pruss, she deduces that the only place wherever this report was recorded and handed to Rosendahl would have to be stored somewhere. And in the hangar on the New Jersey side is the SS Los Angeles, which is the United States form of the Hindenburg. It's nowhere near as big, but it's a ship. It's docked inside. And it is used by the Navy essentially as a bordello.
It's a party house.
It's a party house. And so Gertrude deduces that somewhere in that ship is got to be the records that prove Pruss sent this defect that he discovered over to them, and that's where he stored them, because the FBI have searched everywhere else. They didn't find them, so it has to be in something that the FBI would normally have not searched. She decides to explore this Zeppelin, which is loaded with drunk sailors and prostitutes and gambling and whatnot. And so she is trying to find her way through. And we get this interesting set piece where she actually goes inside, the blimp itself. And for those of you who are unaware, the blimp itself is not 100% filled with helium or hydrogen. It's actually got a bunch of smaller because packets.
Like scaffolding with bladders, multiple bladders within the
Multiple
part
bladders that are attached to the scaffolding that allows it to achieve lift. So you can actually walk around inside this thing, and your voice doesn't change either because it's not actually filled with helium. It's all contained.
Yeah.
And so one of the catwalks inside, there's a box with all the files. Gertrude finds her way up there, and she's heading towards it. And while she's heading towards it, Rosendahl and Eckner come in to grab the files so that they can actually destroy them, so that they can't be used.
And this was all well written and actually made sense because he was going to hold on to those to the last minute for leverage, which made sense. I liked how she got onto the base, that she gets busted by a couple of army police trying to climb the fence before she even gets over. And she's like, "Oh, I'm in trouble." And then they're like, "Oh no, we're told it's a woman. Come on in.
Yeah.
We're allowed to we're allowed to let all the women in." Yeah. You don't have, and then they're like, "You don't have to climb over the fence, ma'am. Come over here to the gate." And they like just let her in. Like, but that was so perfect. It was so plausible, right? It was believable. I hate when there's conveniences in plots that you're like, this is so stupid, right? But that was great. It was great. And then she went in, and it was well described. And then when she's in the room, she locks it behind her, and then she hears them trying to get in, and she climbs up the ladder to go up into the scaffolding. And this whole thing was great. And she doesn't kung fu fight him like in some unbelievable way.
It's all
she
espionage.
Actually hides. Yeah, she hides under the scaffolding as they walk over because she had nowhere to hide. And then she throws her lipstick as a distraction so that she can get the paper before they do out of the box. And then it was really well done. I love this scene. This was great. I have no qualms about it. Very well written, made sense, very plausible. And
you get
then
vivid flashbacks to the Rocketeer in this type of set piece.
Yes. And then when we go to the next scene where we're like, okay, she's got the report. She's going to turn it into the guy who's leading this whole trial. And then we get that taken away, which was great. Give me this roller coaster ride, right? Like we had that happen. So go ahead. What happens next, Script?
Well, when she gets the files, she goes back to see her husband. She goes to Pruss to try and show him that the files are there. And she gets a phone call from her son, who basically has not left Germany. He's at the neighbor's house with his grandmother, and the German police are there basically saying, if you don't cooperate with Karl Syrup, your child and your mother will be gone.
And the way they did that, she talks to her
creepy.
son. I just got to say this real quick. It was very creepy, very, very German, like Gestapo stuff, where they actually put her son, or 8-year-old boy, on the phone, 8 or 7, whatever.
5, I think he's 5, yeah.
Yeah, and he says, "Mommy, we're here with the police. They say that if you don't help Mr. Syrup, they're going to put us in a hotel, and he says it's a very bad hotel."
Yeah.
I think that's almost a direct quote of what the little boy says. And so it's all like, oh my gosh, they're actually letting her kid tell her, like, hey, if you don't do this, we're probably going to get killed or we're going to be put in a prison. And so she, at that point, very reluctantly hands over the paperwork to Syrup, Yeah. And the whole time the nurse is observing all of this. We've kind of talked about her, but there's the floor nurse that's taking kind of over all of these poor burn victims in the burn unit or the hospital. And so yeah, I just wanted to jump in because I really like how that was written as well. That was really good.
Oh yeah, like the script, I only found one mistake in this entire script, and that was on page 97 when the writer accidentally gives a line that's supposed to be for Bend Over, and she puts Karl Syrup's name over it. And that's at the very end, because Karl has already left the scene, but she used obviously a quick key function on Final Draft where she just double tapped enter and then did the line and didn't pay attention to the fact that it's being spoken by the wrong character.
Oh my! I didn't even pick up on that. But that you would, because you've done this 1,000 times.
Not only that, like what the guy says just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I can swing down here real quick and read.
Fire Engine Red, is it that one about the lipstick?
No, it was basically basically it says Karl Syrup says, "Oh, don't be late for Captain Eckner. He's going to tell us who really blew up the Hindenburg." After a smug look at Ben, Karl goes. So that's his exit from the screen. Then it says Gertrude slowly slinks into a bench by the phone, quietly feeling. Ben, ashen, comes to sit next to her. Gertrude, "I'm sorry, Ben, I can't." Karl Syrup, "It's all right. It's not too late for me to run." Like, that's just doesn't make any sense, because why would Karl Syrup have to run? Because at this point, everything is being geared towards Ben taking the fall for the Hindenburg disaster. What
Right.
ends up happening is that since they didn't get the evidence to do so, it was then attributed to Captain Prusses as incompetence, and we, yeah, like we just kind of have to gloss over it because again, there's a lot of interesting scenes that are really well crafted, really well
Okay,
written.
I have
But
a question for
it's
you as a script writer on this too. If I
sure.
because I highlighted something. So yes, go to I'm showing page 97,
Mhm.
and it starts with, I think it's off by one page because my digital note says 97, but the script in the actual script says 96. So go to 96 on the script page, not the PDF page.
Okay.
And it starts with Nurse Rivera, right?
Yes.
Okay, so down just below that, two lines below, we see Carl gets up and comes closer to Gertrude. He's not in his usual candy coat. He's not his usual candy coated self. This is the Carl underneath the syrup. So you can't convey that on film,
Mhm.
right? So is that for the actor or is that for the director to go, okay, because normally you wouldn't even have that, right? You would just film the scene. So how do you convey the line, this is, or the point of view, this is the Carl underneath the syrup? Who's that for? Is it for the director or the actors? What can you
It's
explain?
for the director and the actor because it's supposed to give a tone of the situation right now um because he's the type of guy that he is changing what's going on. Like this is now a serious moment, right?
Yeah,
So
he's always like, we know he's evil, but he's very passive aggressive, and now we're seeing him like the mask slips on purpose. It's not even an accident, right? This
yeah,
is him being like, I'm serious.
yeah. This
He's
is the
kind of the
whole
creepy. I picture that creepy guy on the Indiana Jones, the
yes.
creepy Nazi dude, right? That with glasses. You know what I'm talking about? I have
Oh
no
yeah,
idea what his name
he
was,
who
but
gets his head,
his face melted. Yeah.
his face melted, everything. So yes, so he's basically introduced as this charismatic, jovial type of guy, very very pro party. And then what ends up happening is when he comes in, he doesn't come in any sort of in the same manner that he comes in before. This is basically a scene direction, which is not a problem because basically he's saying he's not his usual candidate Cody Selp. This is the Carl underneath, and then the fire. Then the next line is a fire engine red. So what this type of technique is that it's using the context of the entire scene to frame how you start the scene. So first it's set up with intrigue, which is he doesn't say anything that is blatantly propagandistic with regards to his thing. He's basically just using observation. So for instance, Gertrude's like, I'm looking for my lipstick, and he's already got it. He's like, oh, fire engine red, how appropriate. Like this is the foreboding type of framework that is being used
and
here.
I can hear that line in a German accent, right? Speaking in English with a German accent.
Fire engine red, how appropriate,
I can't do it, but yes, exactly. And so here's my follow-up question to that. When you're writing a script, because I could see how it'd be very easy as someone who, I've written a lot of unpublished fiction, right? But I love to write. I can see how it'd be very easy when you're writing a script to indulge and do that, like something like that line way too often, right? Because you can't do that because you can't. Where's the line that you walk where you're like, I need the director or I need the actor to understand this right here, boom. Like that's why we have, that's why scripts are written in a way where you do have a beat, right? But this, how do you walk that line and not try to hold the hand of your actor or your director too much? Do you know what am I phrasing this?
It's
right?
basically, yeah. It's one of the rules called the less is more. So you just get the basics. You don't have to elaborate much more because the tone of what you're setting for the scene will actually do more information than the actual setup itself. So if the tone is like, okay, I want the atmosphere of this scene to be very cold, very mechanical, very evil, very sinister, you don't frame the scene that way. What you do is you let the dialogue reveal that, but you do subtle setups. So for instance, what's a good one? I read this in a script many years ago. A buddy of mine did this. He had a scene where a fiance was basically having to come in and tell her fiance that she has to leave him. And the way he does that is he describes, she enters the room and she covers her arms as if trying to fight off a chill. That's all he does. And that sets off the tone right now because her next line is like, it is not directly saying I have to leave. It's talking about other things. And that's kind of how you do it. You find something with regards to describing the character to set the tone, but it has to be in a way that an actor can interpret and use. So when you say he's not his candy-coated self, that means the actor's coming in and he's not presenting the face or the warm, inviting nature that he would normally exude in other scenes. He'd be the opposite of that. And instead of saying he walks in cold, he's not this, you know?
Okay, so sorry to interrupt, but even though we know he's a fake slime ball anyway, that none of his niceness was ever real, this just kind of takes it from a 10 and turns it up to an 11 for this scene, is what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely. Like, it's also the inversion of it, right? So if he's at an 11 for his candy-coated, exuberant self, then he also has to be at 11 for the person underneath that mask. The no-nonsense,
Right.
serious, I have got your family, and if you don't do what I want, you're never going to see or hear from them ever again. So
Yeah, this is the guy who would stab you in the back while he's hugging you, staring you in the eyes and smiling at you. That's who this is.
Sure.
This is that guy.
I mean, and that's what everybody in his department was essentially at the time.
Yeah. I think it was probably in your initial interview questions when you get the job. But yeah, okay. So sorry, I love that. I think that the nuts and bolts of script writing, I love to hear that stuff from you. And that was something that stood out to me. I'm like, okay, well, what is this, and how do you walk that line, and when is it appropriate to stick it in there? So yeah, you answered my questions. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, screenplays are not novels. So a lot of first-time writers, they'd write lots of blocky text because they want to describe and set the scene. You really don't need to do that. The way that the format lends itself to covering a lot of information very, very quickly. The scene headings themselves. So you got EXT for your exterior. Boom, we're outside. We already know. You don't have to describe what the outside is like. You just have to say we're outside in a field, and then morning, noon, afternoon, night, or just day, night, whatever you want. That already paints a very vivid picture inside a person's mind, especially if you say, because I just said you're outside in a field. Everybody gets that. I could be a little bit more specific and say you're outside in a cornfield. Boom, done.
Or it's raining, or it's November, or it's
raining,
cold, whatever.
or it's cold, or it's snowing, or something of that nature. That stuff would come following. So if I'm like outside cornfield day, it is. I don't have to say in the cornfield. I say it is snowing. A lone person stands in the midst, stands alone, trying to start a fire. And that's it. I don't have to say stands alone in the field. I just have to say stands alone because we already know the establishing setting is in the field. So you actually, so it just streamlines everything.
And you're not describing what they're wearing or
Don't need to.
what their hair is like or any of that stuff. That's something you could do in a novel, but you don't mess with any of that. I noticed that in scripts. You just get to it.
You primarily get to the point. The only time you do those things is if it's absolutely relevant to the story. So for instance, Gertrude, when she's going into the SS Los Angeles, they describe her as wearing basically a red skirt and a nice outfit. And then because she cannot get up the ladder because the skirt is tight, she has to take off the skirt and she has to do it in her slip. So that's the reason why they described it. It's like, it's the Chekhov's gun. If you're going to describe something about your character, it needs to play into that character later on in the script. So for instance, that's why you say, I'm doing this character. She's in her 30s. She's a woman and she's married. So that already covers a broad spectrum, canvas of traits that anyone reading should be able to understand if you are old enough to read.
Another question, if you'll allow me. So when this screenplay gets greenlit, right? Mm-hmm. At what point in the process do set designers or whoever come in and say, okay, we are going to get to now we have to have the details of this field. We know it's raining. We know it's nighttime because we're going to be accurate to what happened with the Hindenburg, right? Mm-hmm. So that's maybe not the best example, but let's say the courtroom, right? So who decides what wood they use? We're going to use maple for this temporary set for the court scene or whatever, and how they're going to put maybe some American flags up. At what point, whose job is what? Because there's no way a director or some of the producers are on that level of detail, right? So much of this just gets spread out over everyone who does their job. So can you kind of illuminate some of that for those of us who don't know the nuts and bolts of how that comes to be? Who decides all that? How much involved is a director or a set designer or what? How does it kind of come together? Can you just do the broad strokes of that?
Well, sure, it's production by production basis, but in many cases, ideally, the director is the final decision maker on that, but they have what's called an art director. And the art director conducts research with regards to the script. So for a period piece like this, the art director would look for all points of reference of what would best fit in this time frame, and they would come up with a composite of a couple of options that they can present to the director, and the director picks the best one that they think can help facilitate their narrative vision. So that's what the art director does.
And at that step, the screenwriter is gone. They don't consult them, right? Like they bought your script.
Only if the art director needs. Only if the art director needs the screenwriter to be to answer some questions, will they do that. So in the sense of like if you're doing, say a period piece that there's not a whole lot of information publicly available, or you're doing something that takes place in the future, whether it's sci-fi or fantasy or what have you, then there'd be then the art director would work with the screenwriter and the director to get on the same page of what that vision would be. They'd even bring up a storyboard artist as well and to get into the mix there. And they play around. They have concept design artists, all sorts of, a whole team would come in and they would just throw their ideas around and try and get on everything on the same page so that they have a very homogenous view of this fictional world that they're painting together.
So that'd be something like Ridley Scott on the first Alien film, and I can't remember who that artist was.
Or Blade Runner,
that was so famous for all of the alien design and stuff.
Yeah, Geiger.
Yes, and so they all kind of collaborate, and because he would be like, hey, so how would you describe this alien? And then he would, and then he'd like draw something like, okay, but make it more like this, and they would kind of go back and forth until the director and the art director and the writer were all really happy, and then they would just take off from there, and then they would start making actual set pieces and makeup and everything, right?
Right.
Very cool. Very cool. So there is a lot of, there's only so much time to make a film. So I just always wonder, it's like chaos, right? Like you hear so often, like it only takes one thing to make a film fail, but you have to have like 1,000 things go right for it to succeed. And that's just because there's so many people involved and so many steps to go from point A to point Z to get it done. So yeah, that kind of seems like a miracle to me that we even do get good films when you start thinking about how many people. Was it the editor? Was it the costumer? Was it the writer? Was it the director? Was it like there's all these things that can go wrong? Maybe the movie's great, but the music sucks, right? Because they don't have the budget for a good musical score. And I just wonder how many movies came so close to greatness, but one person threw a wrench in the gears and screwed it all up.
More often than anyone is happy to admit. The other part too is like sometimes money's not always the problem. Sometimes there's too much money, and and they use all of it, and it doesn't create the best they want.
Marvel, or Disney. I'm going to say Disney. I'm looking at you.
Disney's one example. I mean, the other part too is there's the old story that Ed Wood Jr. used to say, which is and the only reason I remember this is because I ended up watching Ed Wood yesterday, is that if he had more money, he could make a better film. And it's like, well, no, because you still have to be able to make a good film with no money. And if you can't make a good film with no money, no amount of extra money is going to help you make a better film. It's just...
Well, yeah, and I think that forces you to go back to, I don't want to say the roots, that's cliche, but go back to what makes something great. What film is based on is a story. It's the story. And if you have a great story, you don't need 5,000 CGI shots to make it work,
Correct.
And I think that the new Godzilla, or Godzilla Minus Zero, I don't say the new one because we have the one just coming out now, but Godzilla Minus Zero proved that they were under 15 million or 13 million, I think, for that budget, and look what they did.
Everybody.
By the way,
knew exactly
when is that
what
coming?
to do.
When is that coming to 4K Blu-ray, man? I'm like dying for it. It's one of the first ones I'm going to watch in my new theater.
I'm the wrong person to ask on that. I cannot keep up to date with Blu-ray and 4K releases.
I have to talk to Tom about it, I guess.
Sure.
Because it doesn't seem like it's on my radar anywhere. I haven't seen it, so.
I'm looking forward to it because I was not able to see it in theaters. All the showings were sold out in my area. It was very limited release. Luckily I have a home theater, so I'm not really going to be losing anything from that experience.
Yes,
even though some people argue you need to see it on an 80-foot screen, I'm like, when you take a look at where you're sitting in comparison to the actual 80-foot screen, and if you have a large enough television in your living room, you can actually make the exact same adjustments and see no real diminished quality overall, unless it's the sound, unless your sound system is different. But I am a big advocate for going to theaters and for the big screen if you can. But at the same time, we still have a whole cultural problem, which is that we have too many, and it's been for every generation, even mine, we have too many teenagers or kids that make the theater going experience less than ideal. So
oh yeah, one of the worst ones I had. Somebody brought their 4-year-old kid, and they had those little light up shoes when they run in the hills,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that kid was 4. It wasn't a very full theater. It was probably about a quarter full, But that kid, they let their kid run up and down the aisle for almost the whole film, like 4 or 5 rows down below me. So that's all I saw was these flashing lights. It was so irritating. But yeah, I agree. I love the film going experience, but it all depends on who's in that theater with you anymore. And sadly, I'm like 4 hours from the nearest IMAX. So for the big ones, I don't, like I'd love to see the new Dune in IMAX, but yeah, I'm not going to drive 4 hours for that.
Yep.
But anyway,
so
back to the
so
script,
with this script here, I mean, I will say this: it's got a number of scenes that are quite well written. They're not the best tethered together. For what it is, it's like it's the character work is pretty good. I mean, I really liked watching and following Gertrude as she does her stuff, but I felt I was robbed by the actual investigation aspect, because when you go back to the logline, it's like, here's the one journalist that could really screw it all up. Great, let's see her really screw it all up. Oh, she barely nudges the needle.
Yeah, and like you said, she kind of, it's that story. I guess you'd call it a crutch, where instead of your protagonist being proactive and solving the mystery, they just kind of wait and then it happens, and that's not anywhere near as interesting.
I jokingly call it the Juno effect, because in that movie, Elliot Page, I guess now, determines when she realizes that she's pregnant, she doesn't want to terminate the pregnancy, that she's just going to put it up for adoption. And that's within the first 10, 15 minutes of the movie. And it's a 2-hour film. So now we're waiting for her to carry the child to term and hand off that baby. And everything that's happening up until that point is kind of not really interesting or important, because you have this whole sub-story with Jason Bateman and his horror movies, and he wants to be a musician, and he kind of doesn't like being a husband or a future father. It's like, it's all weird, you know, emo, headspace, pseudo coming of age garbage. And then by the time, she gives birth and gives up the kid, you get that one great line by J.K. Simmons. It's like, next time it'll be intentional, that type of thing. And like, okay, that's sweet, but we waited all this time for that. Like, no, if anything, you should be the problem that she's facing is, you want to explore the most conflict. And the conflict would be, does she want to keep the child or give it up for adoption? And that is kind of like a trope with regards to these types of stories, especially on the Hallmark movie side of things. Mm-hmm. But it's a trope because it works. And if you want to find a new angle onto it, there's definitely other ways to do that. The problem that she had is that the character Juno had no actual conflict. And I know and then this actually goes into Gertrude itself, because she actually has a conflict. She doesn't know if her husband's going to live. She doesn't know what's going to happen to her son or mother over back in Germany if she doesn't cooperate with the propaganda department. And she also wants to know the truth. Oh,
and the uncertainty of the future either way, because she's got the Nazi Party and what's happening. Like they can feel it. They know it's coming. Something bad's going to be happening in the next few years with their government. And and yeah, so yeah, I think that I was fine with Gertrude. I had no problem with any of the real characters in this at all, really.
No, I kind of wanted more Eckner, more Rosendahl, because again, we were introduced to Rosendahl, and he's in a funny situation. He's desperate. I mean, I like the irony of a naval officer who gets seasick. I'm like, oh, great, cool. Can we play with that? Don't get much of this. I guess some of the dark comedy from this writer's perspective is Paul Litchfield being moved to tears by finding out that Captain Pruss saved so many people, and his love for the Zeppelins and the airships itself. They're even singing an airship song. But,
oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
I mean, the way that I'm looking at it here is like, well, I don't see the comedy and I don't see the darkness. And the only darkness I see is coming from essentially Carl Syrup.
Yes.
And
then like we've touched on, then there's all these little like breadcrumbs here and there, but it's not anything like as heavy. I guess you could say heavy-handed, like what we get in something like Fargo or Inglourious Bastards, where you're just like, what is happening in this next scene? Like, oh my God, it's terrible, And that's the thing. I felt like it was never pushed anywhere near as hard as it should have been if it was going for it to be a dark comedy. And if that was the goal, this needs a rewrite for sure.
Well, I would say right off the bat it needs a rewrite, because Ben Dover is such an interesting character, but I think he's overused. I think he only needed to be maybe 3 scenes: the performance scene, and perhaps a little bit of him worried about his future of sorts, and then his testimony scene where he kind of puts everyone else in their place, especially when he's basically saying, like he's asked, you have a dog, right? He's like, not anymore. Why not? Well, it was on the Hindenburg. I mean, I don't have a dog anymore. So I'm not the man with the dog. I'm not anything of those natures. And, the joke about taking the bacon from the Jewish passengers it was rudely put on their food and using it to feed his dog and all that stuff, that was all good. But then we get a scene where he gets a French poodle, and we've got this whole bit where he's trying to train it, and the poodle's not cooperating. I'm like, this is completely useless to the scene. Like, why are we here? Why are we reading this? Why is this being involved?
That's exactly what I thought when I read that. I'm like, sure, I love a dog, but this is dumb. What are we doing here? I feel like that was definitely like sort of a waste of pages.
The purpose of this story is really uncovering the truth. So it's a mystery story, a mystery framing device. So get us into the actual mystery. And they could have done this from two perspectives. One, you could have used the Asian colony, the FBI eccentric investigator who's going through all the wreckage. You then could have used Gertrude trying to do her own research things, even though that is the liberty taken with regards to this story. I'd rather follow and find out how she deduces things and puts them together as a gossip columnist kind of outside of her purview, because, again, she's a very good gossip columnist. She speaks at least 2 languages. She knows how to pick up details and things. I would like to have seen more of that. And then, of course, give us the third perspective of Rosendahl and Eckner when they discover when they figured out what actually happened, or what ended up happening towards the end, which is both actually know the flaw, what's going on, and Rosendahl is using his ignorance of his feigning ignorance of the problem so that he can essentially figure out if Eckner is trustworthy. And when he does, he then reveals, Prust sent it to me before, and I knew there was a problem before that ship came in, but I didn't expect it to actually facilitate anything, because he was so desperate for this program to continue and allow his own career to flourish as a result. You have those 3 points to play with each other. They all come into conflict with each other, but sadly the writer does not weave that into the most effective story, even though I would argue she has the talent to do so. She has the skill and necessary to do so. I think she just didn't trust in the content and the story itself enough, and she didn't trust in the people who she was submitting it to for review enough. So
I could see that, but I would also say that the bones are here for a Clue / Fargo type of film.
Yes.
I think that instead of basing it on this book, you just take the Hindenburg as your premise, and then you build everything out from there, where it's like, okay, maybe we sequester everyone that survived, and they're all locked in a creepy old hotel you can't lock them in a hangar. They have to have somewhere to sleep.
But they're in New
right?
Jersey in the 1930s. It's a nice enough town at the moment. At that moment.
Yeah, so you lock them all, the survivors, into some sort of thing where they're sequestered, and then you have some fun with that on the dark comedy side of it, where you're like, okay, we're going to find out one of you sabotaged the Hindenburg, and now we're going to do this like dark comedy angle to uncover that and get to the end of it and get to the reveal of who caused it. And it's all fiction and it's all fun. And so if it's that, then do that. Lean into it and have a great time with that. That's what I was thinking I was going to read. And instead I'm like, oh no, this is based on a book that is based on historical fact that's been uncovered over the last, 50 years. So what are we doing? That's what I felt like. I'm like, what are we doing? Because it was written well. I think that this writer has a lot of talent. And I just think that this premise, it wasn't laser focused. It was just kind of like, hey, I'm going to sell you that it's this thing, but then I'm going to hand you this thing. And I'm hoping that because I sold it to you as a dark comedy, that will just kind of put a nice veneer over it as you're reading it. That'll be like, oh, okay, this is cool. Yeah. And it's not. It wasn't edgy and it wasn't dark.
Because she forgot the comedy and dark aspect of it. It's like it just kind of fluttered away. It would pop up
every
here
time
and
I got
there.
every time I got a little bit of comedy, it kept reminding me like this could have been so much better, right? That's what it did. It was like teasing me. I'm like, oh my God, the thing where he puts the flag or the Nazi flag in the guy's cast. I'm like, oh my God, that could have been so funny. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, I felt like that just kind of teased me. And I don't tease me. Like give me this awesome dark comedy if we're gonna do it. And then of course we get to the end where that's what I mean. I like the twists and turns. I like how she works so hard to get the whistleblower documents and then loses them because the freaking Nazi creep they've got her family, her son and her mother-in-law or whoever it is back in Germany, and she has to hand it over to Mr. Creepy Syrup Face. And then, don't forget the punch a Nazi in the face moment. We forgot about that.
That was contrived. Yeah. The whole
that just felt so contrived. I'm like, give me, I seriously rolled my eyes when that happened. Um, so yeah, we don't want to talk about the reveal at the very end of the court case, right? You want to save that.
we
No
have to leave
spoilers.
that unfortunately ambiguous
Okay.
because again, the script has not been purchased. It's only a year and change old, so it's still
Yeah.
being shopped around. My
Cool.
advice to Gillian is I would say since the dark comedy aspect wasn't really effectively done in this part, I would cut it out and make it more focused like a Charlie Wilson's War style drama, mystery drama, because you definitely can capture the tone of that, and I think you might be able to find the right people to do this. Basically, frame it as like a historical drama slash biopic, um,
Yeah.
and go from there. And that was my recommendation. And what are your thoughts on it? Your final thoughts on it before we get to the actual voting process
The green light or the
or the
throw it in the
pass?
garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, um, I don't know. I kind of already said it. I feel like it was just a bait and switch, which
Mhm.
if I think I would have liked it better had I not been told it was a dark comedy, then I would have went in just completely open to it.
Me too.
But I'm an adult. I can set that aside. It just took me. It just sucks because it's hard to get rid of that emotional feeling of you've been lied to after you're on page 40 and going, no, this isn't going to take off. Where is this?
It's like a crying
So what?
game.
Yes, exactly. I'm in the shower crying. So yeah, I think that I think it's good. Like I said, so here's the pros. I think that the writing's good. I think the characters good. We have just enough development on our characters that I believe who they are, and I don't need more. I'm not wasting time on backstory or anything. I felt that was good. The third act, the payoff, where we finally get to see the comeuppance happen. That's all I'll say because of spoilers. I felt like that was fine. It was good. Um, it's very based on history, which I think it's important that we remember our history so we don't repeat it. And I think it's also parallels what's going on in the world today, which was another thing. Like I said, I think this parallels Boeing, which just so happens to be in aeronautics as well. So similarly, it's almost creepy. And I learned a lot. And so if I can watch a film, even if it's semi-fiction or pure fiction, but I can learn something new or experience something new, then I'm happy, right? I'm happy as long as it's not trying to talk down to me or propagandize me.
Right.
And so I felt like this didn't insult my intelligence. I felt like it was worth my time. I would just say it's not a dark comedy. Don't tell me that it isn't when it's not. And then I guess I would just say in the end, I liked pretty much all the characters. I did. So overall, I think that this was, of all the scripts we've read so far on the show, I'd say this is in my top 6. Probably it's probably like my 6th favorite. It's hard to separate that I got lied to about what it was. You didn't have to lie to me to start reading the script. I would have read it anyway. In fact, it was to such a degree. I'll tell you this script when you sent the email out that you do every week, right? I read it and then I started reading the actual script and I thought, did script mix this up? Did he mix up the what's it called?
The
Not
log
plot
line.
but-
Yeah.
Yeah, the log line. Did he mix that up with the wrong thing? Because there's another one that's related to the Hindenburg and he mixed it up. I actually thought that happened at first. But then of course you set me straight when we started talking. But yes. So I don't think that's a good start. You never want your first impression to be that you're being lied to. That just kills it. So
Right.
I did my best to separate from that. And I would just say, yeah, I think that there's way more good than bad in this script. It is not a bad script by any means.
All right. So then, is that make it a green light or a pass for you, sir?
Oh, I wish there was something in between the two. This is the first one I haven't been definitive on. I think that I would say if I had to, I'd pass, but it would be a temporary pass. I'd say we need to pick a lane and we need to rewrite and then come back to me because I love the premise. I love the characters. We just need to get this focused first. So as it is now, I would pass.
I'm in the same boat. I'd give this a pass, a reluctant pass, just because the tone is inconsistent. That's basically it. You pitched me on something that made me open the script with the dark comedy aspect. However, any story with regards to any disaster should really get anyone to open up a script because people like learning about disasters, as horrible as they are. We don't want to experience them firsthand, but we when we do know of one, we kind of want to, we have this drive within our species where we need to have answers to these types of questions. And I think it was not the most useful approach to frame it in that way, and then start off with a little bit of that tone and then abandon it for the majority of the script. So with that in mind, I will say this: Gillian Weeks is a very competent writer, and I think if she focused on that part, this would be a fantastic script that I think a lot of people, especially history buffs, would really like. You could do this for a very small budget, under 20 million. And we've got some high quality footage of the Hindenburg from those newsreels that could be used, because one of the things I felt was really clever is that at no point does the script depict the showing of the actual disaster. They want to show the reactions of people. So that already saves you a lot of money on digital effects and compositing right off the bat. So props to her for being very, very fiscal on the writing side with that in mind. But yeah, this is a reluctant pass for me because.
And don't just a side note too, and the very name comes from the radio broadcast, "Oh the Humanity."
Oh, the Humanity, yeah, which
that was spoken by the radio broadcaster at the time.
Spoken by the radio broadcaster, and then parodied in part of the thumbnail that I did with WKRP in Cincinnati with the Thanksgiving Day turkeys being thrown from the helicopter.
Oh yeah, a great thumbnail.
As soon as I saw the title and then I saw what it was, I was like, well, I clearly have to throw that in there. I can't not do it.
And again, for the dark comedy, that's a great title.
Yeah.
Oh, the Humanity, right? Like that's like, it just leaves it wide open for, wait, oh, the Humanity, as in like, because people don't sincerely say that, but back then they did, right?
Yeah.
Now you're like, oh, the Humanity, right? Like it's just so dated and cheesy. And that's why it's a great title for if this was going to be a dark comedy. Like, okay, I'm ready. Set me up. Let's be cheesy. Let's be dark. What happened with the Hindenburg, right? Like, and the whole cause of it was two people having sex, and after they got done, they lit up to smoke a cigarette, and the thing blew up, right? Like it could have been anything. Like we could have had something crazy.
It could have been your Clue, your airplane.
Yeah.
It could have been your Fargo type, your Poor Things. If you're going to go with a dark comedy on a historical event, you have to really commit to that. And I think that commitment is what basically is determined for me why I wouldn't give this a green light if I was in a position where I could produce this. And that's what I have there.
Are you going to read some of the comments? There's one that stands out to me and had me laughing.
Why don't you go ahead and do that? Well, it's a little off course, but let's go for it. Let's hear from you guys out there.
So Benjamin Dover, I love the name, by the way, said, I was disappointed that Ben didn't have a bigger part.
I would say he has a little bit too much of a part from there, but for you, Benjamin Dover, I can see why you would like to have seen more of them.
Yeah. Anyway, that was a good line. We don't have a ton of chat, but that was good. I do have something, if you'll let me. I want to, from the intro of the actual book from the author.
Go right ahead. Absolutely.
About Hugo. So now we're back to the fact, right? The fact part. And this is, I want to read this. Like I said, my biggest takeaway from this script is I would have bought the Kindle edition, but I just love my books being actually in my hands. So I will be buying a hardcover of this. And I wouldn't have that time for the show. So I'm going to read you part of the intro from Amazon. You know how they let you sample the book. And this is what the author, Michael McCarthy, wrote in the intro, talking about, he's just talking about the history and what he went through to kind of get some of the stuff. And this is what he says. He says, minor discrepancies in Eckner's accounts put me on the long trail of his deception. The more stones I turned, the more muck I found. It all added up to something remarkable. Hugo Eckner, a global celebrity in between the world wars, had led a double life. His fanatical desire to build the largest aircraft ever, the Hindenburg, first connected him with chilling figures, including Joseph, how do you say it, Goebbels? Goebbels? Yeah, and Hermann Goring. Then, step by step, behind the scenes, Eckner skulked along a crooked road to spy flights, to rocket bombs, to slave labor from the notorious, Daku concentration camp. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting to me that, this is the part that I really liked. Unlike Nazi allies who slipped into Argentina or elsewhere after the war, Hugo Eckner hid in plain sight. He used his pre-war fame to hoodwink the public, brazenly taking the spotlight to declare himself a hero who, given his self-proclaimed vocal opposition to the Hitler regime, supposedly came within a hair of losing his life in Nazi Germany. The Eckner pretense began to crack in German scholarship in World War II arms production and slave labor. This is where I was thinking of the 80s, right here. He
Yeah.
says slave labor after the mid 1980s, with the opening of archives on judicial procedures aimed at identifying and purging Nazis from public life. So the information, the facts that are in this book came to light in the mid 80s, and that's what sunk Eckner, is when they finally started having hard evidence saying, no, this dude was very dirty. Not this who was the guy from I can't believe this. I love flying stuff. I can't. Who was the famous pilot from back then, back in the 40s and 50s when we got a movie with Leonardo DiCaprio playing him.
Oh,
Not Hugh Hefner, obviously.
no, not
but
not Hugh
what's his name?
Hefner, but
Somebody
oh
help
God,
me. Chat, help me.
he was featured in last week's script.
Yeah, the famous flying guy.
The Aviator.
Yes, the movie The Aviator.
Gosh.
Anyway, he was like, that's how big Hugo was back then. Like the Zeppelins were looking at,
Howard
I mean,
Hughes.
they were the
Howard
biggest.
Hughes. Sorry.
Howard Hughes. Yes, thank you. And so this guy was super famous. I mean, I think he even says in here that he had pictures with some of the American presidents, like Roosevelt and stuff. Like he was super famous.
He was super famous, and I mean, even though publicly we didn't learn this until the 80s, the fact that he was returned back to Germany during Operation Paperclip, should have actually clued a lot of people in. But again, the world was much bigger at that point in history. The news of such things would not have traveled as fast then as it would today, which you'd probably learn while he's on the plane heading back in current day society.
Yeah. Yeah, and you look at that, and even in the script, the way she wrote him, it made me think. I'm like, because it's all about empathy. Like when I read, I like to try and get a line with each of the characters and go, man, how dark would you have to be this evil, or how nice, to be this kind of a protagonist. And with him, I just was like, what a horrific thing to, like, we all make mistakes in our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
But look at the path, because he didn't start out as a bad dude, right? He just kept making more and more bad decisions until he became a monster. And I'm like, that's how it happens, though.
Yeah.
That's the lesson from the story. Is it's not like the lesson is don't make bad decisions today or tomorrow. Like, do your best every day. Don't just keep on making bad decisions, because they keep growing and they keep getting worse and worse and worse as you become older. So I was like, yeah, I can't imagine being his age and looking back and being like, oh yeah, I have all this guilt about the people that died that I knew that I killed. I killed them because of my decisions, and I didn't do what I was supposed to. I don't want to get into spoilers, but what I was supposed to do to protect them from my engineering design. It was not the same situation as the Titanic. I'll tell you that right now. Not even close. It was the Hindenburg was totally avoidable. The Titanic with the glacier, not the same thing. The captain wasn't like, I'm going to go hit that glacier. I know right where it is, and I'm going to go as fast as I can and get as close as I can to impress my everyone on this boat. That's not what happened.
No, but there is a parallel to that, which is we do know by speculative records and plausibility that the captain of the Titanic was definitely not as competent as Captain Pruss was with the Hindenburg.
Yes,
based on the records.
That's true. And then this is a quick side note. I love this stuff, but there's some new evidence that has come out with the Titanic that there was actually a fire in one of the coal. What do they call them? The coal pits or whatever inside the ship.
Oh,
that they couldn't put out, and so they were actually running with that the whole time. And you can see it. They've found some pictures that someone uncovered in their attic. Like this was in the last couple of years. You can look it up, and they've got some pictures of it in the port after the fires had started, but before they had left, right, for the cruise. And you can see the actual darkening. I don't know if it's quite black. I can't remember because it's a black and white photo, but you can see the darkened area where the heat inside that boiler room is so hot. And I guess in order to put out those coal fires, it's really difficult to do, and they had to get going. And so what they'll do is they were going to be running the furnace anyway, and they've got like several of them that run the engines, and so they just went. And that also, it was on the same side that the iceberg hit, that would have made the metal very brittle because it was so hot for so long. or more malleable, I guess. And so it basically created a weak spot for the iceberg to even have done even more damage. So it definitely didn't help things that happened. So anyway, it would just be nice, like if we had something this definitive, what he found about the Hindenburg, it'd be great if somebody did some deep dive and we found all this cool stuff that led us to more facts about, what happened with the Titanic. But yeah. Anyway, I like the script. I'm glad I filled in today. Whoever I filled in for, thanks for giving me the opportunity to do this one.
Not a problem. Like, you will be back pretty soon, because you are booked for another episode already. I'm already starting to fill in the other dates there for anyone else out there listening, especially for the other team, for us, the team members out there that I'm certain are listening as well. We are going to be getting into the 2023 scripts very soon. So these are the most recent stuff that's going to be circulating around town. We'll have to be a little bit more stringent on the spoiler side of things, but aside from that, it's going to be very interesting, because there's a lot of scripts that might surprise you out there. And if you want to get a hint of what those scripts are, please go sign up to my Patreon at patreon.com/scriptdoctor, where you can sign up for the 1 week free trial member, where you get access to all the stuff. You even get access to the list of the 2023 blacklist scripts and their log lines, plus my analysis of them as well. A number of those scripts will be read by the team over here on Scripts on Saturdays, and we'll be giving you coverage and our thoughts on them throughout the rest of this year. So look forward to that. With that being said, I want to thank TJ Mack for filling in this week. Can't wait to see what you got next for the next time you'll be on, in addition to a few newer faces that'll be showing up as well. And we'll be seeing some familiar ones that those of you who've been following the show since the start of January will be more than welcome to see back again. And we're going to continue that as long as they're all available. So with that, thank you so much, everyone out there, for listening. And never forget, when it comes to great story, it all starts with the script.